So, before we get started, a small disclaimer. I did watch the movie, yet somehow I did not pay a single cent for it. And to be honest, if I would not have my methods of getting information I need, as well as the resources I need for free, I certainly would not go after those information and or resources. So, that being said, I'm as biased as someone can be, because, obviously, I'm an active worshipper of the wonderful deities, especially my overall beloved goddess, Athena, for whom I not only wrote an entire book, first link in the description as well as a pinned comment, and made an audiobook version on YouTube, second link, but also made a 3-hour course on my second channel, split into 2 6-hour videos, the other 2 links in the pinned comment and description, to teach Attic dialect, which is the classical Greek, as well as having written and published a grammar book for the Attic dialect, again, link in the pinned comment. And I'm teaching Homeric Greek via the Homeric Odyssey, at least a little bit. Furthermore, I have been fighting, so to speak, misconceptions about the Greek mythology for nearly a decade now. So, yeah, I'm kinda very biased. But I watched it without any bias, as much as I could, of course. And thus, the following is my own opinion. Feel free to disagree, but be respectful and polite. No hatred or strong language. We are not like the Cyclops Polyphemus or the suitors of Ithaca. A little reference to my previous video. I did talk a lot about the different kind of mythologies, which means mythology as stories versus mythology as part of a religion. And obviously, with the stories of Homer, the Iliad and Odyssey in particular, we clearly have mythology as stories. And then there's another question I had. Why was only Athena portrayed, but not the other wonderful deities? Now, don't get me wrong on this one. I definitely prefer it when the wonderful deities are implied off-screen, rather than potentially butchered on-screen. The one goddess they never should put on screen, I think, as it will always end up kinda bad. They simply can't portray her properly. And this also goes for Zendaya. I'm not saying that her acting skills are bad, by no means. But even the best actresses and actors can only work with what they got. And if the script fails, then there is not really much they can do. And when it comes to portraying any deity, this script will ultimately fail. There is nothing a really good actress or actor can do to prevent this. And that comes from someone who not only actively worships Athena, hence my extreme bias, but also has studied Greek mythology for over a decade. I have, again, even written a book specifically about Athena, talking about all the myths she appears in, and explaining them, explaining her roles, and much more. And in various online interviews and videos, where some of the cast is being asked about anything related to mythology, they either act like it would be extremely difficult.
What's your favorite mythological figure? The favorite one. Yeah, it's a shot in the dark. That's right.
My favorite mythological person or what?
Or creature. You can choose.
Yo, I'm jet lagged. I don't think I can think of that.
Okay.
No.
Extremely difficult, as if they did not just make a movie about the most important pieces, or one of the most important pieces of literature of Greek mythology. Also, it would be helpful if you would watch my previous 2 deep dive videos as well, to understand certain aspects of the Odyssey that I will be go over during this review. In my magnum opus, the hymn to my overall beloved goddess Athena, to be more precise, the ninth point, the journey of Odysseus, patron and protector of the Odyssey. In the description, you can find the timestamps. I have already covered the meaning of her doing, yet I will try to have it as simple as possible here. But on a lot of the topics, obviously, I will only be able to tangent rather than deep dive. Yet, this review kinda serves as a great third part of the Odyssey deep dive. Especially because we have talked about a lot of important parts already. And there will be more parts to this series, of course. Then there's another thing. And this actually kinda made me a little bit mad. Here, have a look at the little passage of the actress Lupita Nyong'o, who played Helen of Troy, who said the following.
I'd be like, so Homer, how do you feel about the screen time given to these women, considering how little you spend with them?
Yet, if we look at the actual screen time given to the female cast, we see that. So, not only is this way less, but if we also consider that she, again, Lupita Nyong'o, did not even read the Odyssey, as stated by herself, before, as well as the fact that there are a lot of female characters in the original Homeric Odyssey. I probably make an entire video about all the female characters at some point as well. It becomes more and more absurd. The next thing, Sinon is not part of the Odyssey, but the Aeneid. The character of Sinon is not part of the original Homeric Odyssey. He originates exclusively from Virgil's Aeneid, or in the English title, the Aeneid. So, to give a bit of context, the Trojan horse. Sinon is the pivotal Greek soldier who feigns betrayal by his own side, letting himself be captured by the Trojans. He is responsible for telling them the Trojan horse is a sacred offering to the goddess Athéna, thus tricking them into wheeling it inside their city walls. In the Homeric Odyssey, though, here it details Odysseus' journey after the fall of Troy, while the Trojan horse is referenced in the Odyssey. The story of how it was actually infiltrated and how Troy fell is outside the scope of Homer's poem. We do see something similar with the golden apple, where Hades has to choose between the three goddesses Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite. This golden apple, this decision of Hades, is outside of the Iliad, as it was written long after Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And again, if I have told numerous times, Greek mythology is not Roman mythology. Yet, I'm sure you know who actually is in the Odyssey, in the crucial moment of Odysseus going into the Hades, which is the underworld, talking to someone. That someone is Achilles. I talked about that in the previous video. Achilles' regret of choosing a short life of glory and war over a long home life. Here, a little insert. While writing my script for this review, something else happened. As of the time of writing this, it is not 100% confirmed, yet it very much seems like it is true. The actual ratings, for example on Rotten Tomatoes and platforms like that, are heavily altered and show a much higher positive rating than in actuality. I will not include this in my review, but I wanted to mention this here as well, because It seems like not only did the movie not really flop, but also not really not flop. It seems like there is even a shady attempt of drastically pushing positive reviews, which are paid, before the movie was made public. And after it was public, a lot of shenanigans and dubious behavior is still going on. Anyway, let us begin. Now, from my perspective, Nolan's Odyssey is, to say it in one word and be polite, embarrassing. The film failed to build any emotional depth between its characters. Even at the very beginning, it felt ridiculous. Just the first 3 minutes, by the way. So instead, it repeatedly shatters the viewer's immersion with disastrous casting choices. Again, nothing against the actresses and actor themselves, they just are not fitting for that particular role. Then we have awkward dialogues, such as dad instead of father. Here, they did not care the slightest bit about the language and what it meant, because father is a word that was used to show respect, to honor your, well, father. Changing it to a more colloquial dad is not just making it modern, it changes the entire relationship between Telemachus and Odysseus, his father. Yet, when it comes to Penelope, it is just mother and not mom. So, why did they include dad in the first place? Which gets changed through the movie to father anyway. Then we have TikTok-like editing, meaning many cuts that throws you out of any possible immersion, as well as downright absurd details. For this, let's have a look at that one. Well, that might as well be the dumbest design of the Trojan horse in cinematic history. And this is indeed Nolan's Trojan horse that appears exactly like this, as you can see, in the movie. So, rather than constructing it the way we know it from early ancient depictions, Nolan, once again, feels the need to put his own modern stamp on it and redesign it entirely. The result is a horse so poorly conceived that it is almost impossible to fit people inside it. Yet, somehow, for the Trojan horse that is supposed to have people inside and can't fit people inside, that is not even the worst part of it, because during high tides, the lower section ends up submerged in the water, which means the man hiding inside would more or less be drowned. Not much help in a battle if they are dead. So, and this is supposedly the invention of Odysseus, the legendary master strategist. Don't worry, we will see more of his brilliant ideas later on. So, the design is so unbelievably foolish that it is difficult to find words to describe it. Well, I guess foolish is a good start. Next, we have the battle scenes. Those are conceived with a similar lack of intelligence. You see, there is no sign of tactics or strategy whatsoever. In Nolan's version, combat consists of a crowd of ancient Greeks, or at least Hollywood's idea of ancient Greeks. Now, here I must say that I'm not mad about non-Greek actors playing Greeks. that's fine, of course. Yet, not having any Greeks in there is a whole nother story, and certainly not a good one. Thus, I'm kinda mad about the fact that it seems like everyone else, in terms of ethnicity or other kind of groupings, has been cast from all sorts of different diversity groups. And of course, there's a time and a place where that is a fantastic idea. Inclusion. But certainly not when you're adapting an epic like the ones of Homer, and still using the same names. And here I have to say, so much would have been solved if just the names would have been changed. Not the story, just the names. Anyway, those Greek warriors charging around the battlefield, screaming at the top of their lungs, as any proper warrior would do, as a nameless soldier die in complete confusion, the main character slowly trudged through the frame, apparently an effort to look important. So, even a lot of this could be forgiven. Sometimes just looking epic is enough, even if the logic is nowhere to be found. If the storytelling itself were compelling. Yet, unfortunately, that is where the film falters most severely. Well, that and a few other parts. As said in introduction, the TikTok-like cutting, the dialogues, etc. are really bad. So, it becomes rather obvious that Nolan never truly connected to the ancient source material, which becomes very evident if you look at the translation he used. He could have used so many different ones. There are a lot of really good ones out there. But he chose Emily Wilson's, which, in my opinion, is among the worst ones possible. Most likely, I will make another video talking about the issues with that translation, and why there is so much wrong with that. The fairy tale wonder and mythical enchantment of Odysseus' voyage are almost entirely absent. Instead, the legendary episodes are rushed through one after another, with little care and almost no appreciation for their unique character. Now, to be fair, Nolan's Odyssey still stands miles above Disney's disastrous attempts at adapting Greek mythology. Yet, can this be really any kind of a argument? Again, maybe I will make some content about this as well, the Disney adaptation of Greek mythology that is. Looking at this right now, it seems like there's a lot of work for me to do. Yet, in my opinion, what Nolan has delivered here does not even rise to the level of an average adaptation. It's far beyond. Well, underneath. Among all the major film versions of the Odyssey, this one is without a question the weakest by far. So, what I find particularly interesting is that the overwhelmingly positive reviews that seem very obvious to be paid for, sorry, at least the early ones, focus a lot on how monumental and gigantic Nolan's production is supposed to be. Watching it in IMAX, they say, makes everything feel larger than life. Well, that is what happens when people celebrate the size of the screen rather than the quality of what is shown on said screen. Yet, what almost no reviewer actually explains, at least I have not come across it, is what Nolan's central idea is. What is he really trying to say? What is the film attempting to communicate? Again, as said in previous videos over and over again, mythologies as stories have meaning, they are symbolic, they teach, educate, explain. They have central messaging. So, what was Nolan's central idea here? Even in the most enthusiastic reviews, I have yet to see anyone seriously address that question. Again, that is at the time of writing the script. Instead, I read over and over again that all the hatred towards the movie be fake, and that people just complain because they only now become experts in Greek culture, mythology, or some other political nonsense. So, let's do exactly that, addressing the question about the central idea of this movie. Because to understand why Nolan's interpretation ultimately fails, and not just hating for the purpose of hating, we first have to really understand what he is trying to achieve. The Odyssey, as it has come down to us, tells the story of a new kind of hero or protagonist. Odysseus is not primarily a man of overwhelming physical strength. Instead, he is the clever strategist, so mental strength, who succeeds the older generations of heroes, whose greatness was measured mainly by physical strength, by brute force. His return home, Nostos, symbolizes the restoration of order, the establishment of a society governed by laws and reason, where chaos and anarchy had previously prevailed. Odysseus, therefore, represents civilization's triumph over the untamed and the wild. In the epic, which is traditionally attributed to the Greek poet Homer, another central theme is, and that is very important, reverence for the wonderful deities and obedience to their divine laws. So, the Cyclops Polyphemus violates the sacred laws of hospitality, Xenia, and is blinded as a consequence. Odysseus' companions slaughter sacred cattle of the sun god or sun titan Helios, despite being forbidden to do so, and are punished with death. Odysseus mocks a son of Poseidon, Polyphemus, and, as a consequence, is condemned to wander the seas, with the storms of Poseidon, aka the wrath or anger of Poseidon, at him. Now, Nolan fundamentally reinterprets the story. In his version, Odysseus is not an eloquent heroic figure, which is some of the more important and most famous attribute of Odysseus. He is literally known for exactly that, being eloquent. But a man psychologically shattered by the Trojan War, so PTBS. It feels more like the rest of Nolan's figures in his other movies. The blood on his hands has left him deeply traumatized, which would make sense in a modern setting, but certainly not back then. His journey home, again Nostos, therefore becomes a process of confronting and healing from his own guilt. And that psychological view is a completely modern look and nowhere near faithful to the Homeric epic. And in typical Nolan fashion, the audience is even invited to ask whether Odysseus really experienced these adventures at all. Or is it all in his head to deal with the trauma of the war? Which again, in the context of the Homeric epic, does not make any sense. Perhaps the Cyclops and the Lystrugians are merely psychological manifestations of the horrors of war. Perhaps Kirke's transformation of the companions into swine reflects nothing more than Odysseus' perception of the drunken victory celebrations after the destruction of Troy. The film hints that many of these mythical encounters may simply be symbolic hallucinations triggered by the lotus fruits. And while the entire story is indeed symbolic, as stated numerous times now, mythology is stories. That is not the meaning behind it at all. The meaning is fundamentally about Xenia and Nostos. What is, again, check out my latest video. As well as fundamentally obeying the laws of the wonderful deities and honoring the wonderful deities. Now, even the golden final scene in which Odysseus departs westward with Penelope, leaving the throne to his son Telemachus, can be interpreted as a vision of death. Supporting that interpretation is the sudden hard cut. That, very much in the style of Oppenheimer, shifts to another timeline, or perhaps into the traumatized mind of Odysseus himself. So, it's basically a classic Nolan move. And the question remains, does Odysseus actually die at the end? Or, to phrase it differently, does the spinning top fall? Or doesn't it? Regardless of how one chooses to interpret the film, I think everyone, including those who enjoyed it, can agree at least on this. Nolan's Odyssey presents the voyage as a symbolic exploration of trauma and guilt. Thus, we have a completely different symbolism, rather than the previously mentioned Xenia and Nostos, the reverence and obeying of the wonderful deities, and the laws of the deities. So, his interpretation is again completely missing the point of the original story. We have already seen a similar central idea in The Return, or The Return to Ithaca, starring Ralph Fiennes, a much better movie in my opinion. And before going any further, let me make one thing clear. I have absolutely no problem with radically reinterpreting an ancient story. That's perfectly fine. But, if done so, it should not take the same name as the original work. Not the characters, not the title. The locations can keep the same names. The monsters can more or less be the same. Because the names in the original epos are not chosen at random. No, not in Greek mythology at all. In Greek mythology, every name, every place, every lineage, and so on, has meaning. Etymologically linked to something that gives the symbolic aspects meaning. By changing the story, the meanings are no longer aligning. So, personally, I'm not a fan of turning every adventure into a modern psychotherapy session. It can work at some, but certainly not here. In my view, the original epic simply doesn't lend itself to that reading. Yet, as an artistic approach, it is entirely legitimate. Yet again, change the names. It is totally okay to reinterpret, to modernize, to have some artistic changes to it. But again, just change the names, so that it is obvious that it is inspired by, and not adapting, the original work. In that sense, it is perfectly reasonable to reinterpret the individual episodes of the voyage. For example, portraying the Lystrigonians not as barbaric giants. Barbaric here means not Greek, but as heavily armed military force in order to symbolize the horrors of war, is perfectly valid creative decision. It is a modern view. It fits in our current timeline. And that is what mythology makes out. reflecting the current time. Yet, if reinterpreting an ancient epic, then the view is at that time, not the current one, unless it is inspired by rather than adapting it. So, my problem with the film lies a little bit elsewhere. It is not Nolan's interpretation itself, but it is more what he does with that interpretation. The impression I get is that Nolan has imposed a kind of creative vow of celibacy upon himself, refusing to allow any genuine sense of joy or wonder into the ancient material. And this is absolute nonsense. The Homeric Odyssey does have humorous parts. It does have a lot of wonder, a lot of color. Why that may be the case is something we will return to later. So, in the film, the physical embodiment of Odysseus' guilt is the face of a young woman executed during the fall of Troy. Inside his mind, the goddess Athéna appears to him in precisely this form, serving as his constant companion throughout the journey. Athéna therefore becomes something akin to a therapist, a symbolic spirit confronting Odysseus with the crimes of his past. She is, in effect, the manifestation of his guilt. Yet, of course, this bears little resemblance to the role the gods play in the ancient epic. But again, that is simply Nolan's interpretation. I already talked a lot about my overall beloved goddess and her role in the Odyssey, but this, again, referencing my magnum opus. Now, here is where I'm a little bit conflicted. On the one hand, why cast one of the most recognizable stars in Hollywood, Zendaya, in the role of a young woman, well, a goddess, who is supposed to embody an intensely personal wartime trauma? Her face, Zendaya, has become almost omnipresent in modern blockbuster cinema. Yet, I do understand the critic about Zendaya playing my overall beloved goddess Athéna. And yes, I still would prefer it when the wonderful deities are implied on-screen rather than butchered on-screen. But, for example, in the Odyssey 1997, it is possible to make it great. Yet, and that is where my confliction comes in. To be completely honest, when I saw Zendaya portraying my overall beloved goddess, I did not once really think about Zendaya, but about Athéna. But, and that is where I'm a bit conflicted. This has less to do with her performance and more to do with how much Athéna means to me, no matter who portrays her. And to be fair, I did not even pay that close attention to the story for the roughly 5 minutes she appears on screen. I was thinking about Athéna the whole time. So, every time I'm talking about this aspect, I'm very biased, yet positively, because I'm always in awe when I see Athéna. But again, that does not mean that from a point of view of a movie that is a good idea. It can be, again, Odyssey 1997, but here, on a objective level, Zendaya portrays less the most wonderful goddess is, and rather becomes a imaginative therapist-like entity, a companion solely based in the mind. And while the idea of having a wonderful deity in your mind as a companion you can talk to is beyond magnificent, having that aspect always to it, implying a non-existence of the wonderful deities otherwise, that is the issue I have. So, as I've said, I'm a little bit contradicted here. On the one hand, why casting someone who is so recognizable that any immersion fails? On the other hand, I'm just too biased when it comes to my overall beloved goddess Athena, which means I'm, again, always in awe. Yet, another thing. Since Zendaya is instantly recognizable, how should we as the viewer truly see the horrors of war? Again, on an objective level, for those few moments she appears on screen, we simply see her, Zendaya, and not the horrors of war. Now, one final point. In Homer's poem, Athena disguises herself as Mentor, an old family friend. The gods have decided that Odyssey should finally return home to Ithaca, and Athena goes there in disguise to encourage Telemachus. So spoke bright-eyed Athena, daughter of Zeus. Nolan's mentor, however, is simply a man. Other characters repeatedly tell us that he has the wise eyes of Athena, but the audience never actually sees any evidence of that. And again, I prefer it when the wonderful deities are implied off-screen rather than butchered on-screen. But that is just not enough implication. And then, after Mentor dies, another character casually remarks something along the lines of, well, maybe he really was Athena in disguise. I mean, the intention is obvious. Nolan wants to preserve the names and familiar mythological references as a form of fan service. But the issue is, the screenplay simply has no convincing way of integrating them naturally. The result is a lifeless character whose purpose remains unclear. No one in the audience really understands why he is there, or why everyone keeps comparing him to Athena. And this illustrates one of the film's central problems. At no point does Nolan succeed in creating genuine immersion, sustained tension, or deep emotional investment. As mentioned in the beginning, with their TikTok, light hunts, and horrible dialogues, whenever he comes close, the illusion collapses and abruptly pulls us back out of the story. It throws us out of every possibility of immersion. And this problem begins almost immediately with the dialogue. Early in the film, the characters constantly explain things to one another that they, themselves, the characters, inside the story, should already know. And it is a typical method for many movies and series, explaining it to one another in a given setting, so that we, the audience, are on the same page and know what is even going on here. And while it can work in the right circumstances, here, in this movie, it didn't. Or they deliver lines such as, "Your mother and you meant everything to him." At the same time, the audience is shown a family from behind for barely 2 seconds. That is simply weak writing and horrible editing. Yet, what hurts the film most is its pacing. The actual voyage itself occupies less than half of the total running time, and structurally, that is perfectly acceptable and even faithful to Homer's narrative. Again, into my previous videos, I did summarize the entire 24 books. Now, the problem is that Nolan attempts to squeeze 8 separate episodes into roughly 75 minutes. We have the Cyclops, the Laestrygonians, Kirke, Hades, the Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, the island of Helios, and Calypso. That leaves, on average, less than 10 minutes for each episode, and fits again into the TikTok-like editing. And that is exactly how the film feels. Every stop on the journey is rushed through a breakneck speed, as though it were an obstacle the film cannot wait to get out of the way. The classic 1954 adaptation, feel free to watch it on my channel by the way, I have uploaded it in 3 different dub versions, starring Kirk Douglas, handled this far more intelligently. There, several episodes were shortened or combined. For example, those involving Kirke and Calypso, allowing each remaining section considerably more narrative room to breathe. We are Greeks, we have fought for 10 years, and now we're trying to return home. Nolan commits the cardinal sin of trying to fit as much material as possible into those 75 minutes. And the result? Feels hurried, emotionally detached, and full of careless decisions. So, why not just make a trilogy out of it? There's so much more profit for this anyway. Let's take the encounter with the Cyclops Polyphemus as an example. Anyone expecting a faithful adaptation of Homer's clever, almost theatrical exchange, a tense encounter driven by dialogue and psychological suspense, will be sorely disappointed. In Nolan's film, Polyphemus never speaks. As a result, there is never any real interaction between him and Odysseus. The fairy tale quality of the original episode is eliminated completely. Nolan's Polyphemus is little more than a gigantic, mindless monster. It evolves of pure Greek, so the violation of Xenia has been done justice. Disappears almost as quickly as he appears, and that's it. That's the end of it. From a pure technical standpoint and cinematic point of view, the sequence is impressive. Rather than relying entirely on CGI, the filmmakers appear to have constructed enormous practical props. Among them, a massive Cyclops hand. So, visually, it works remarkably well. If it would be a little bit longer on the screen, that is. And narratively, however, the scene is completely helpless. Again, what good does it do if you can't enjoy it and it is gone after just a few seconds or minutes? Let's remember how the original story unfolds. There, Odysseus outwits the Cyclops, demonstrating the very quality that defines his character: intelligence and eloquence. What is your name? Tell me. Speak. I'm listening. To which Odysseus replies, My name is nobody. Later, after Polyphemus has been blinded, he cries out, Help me, brothers! Nobody is killing me. Nobody has destroyed me through trickery. Yet, after escaping, Odysseus cannot resist mocking the Cyclops from the safety of his ship. His vanity becomes his own downfall, and that of his crew, because he proudly shouts his true identity across the sea. Cyclops, listen, if any mortal ever asks who blinded you, tell him it was Odysseus, destroyer of city. The crafty Odysseus conquered you. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, son of Laertes. Which, to be honest, was just completely stupid of him. But that makes an important part of the symbolism of the Homeric Odyssey. By doing this particular nonsense, Homer shows that hubris will be an obstacle and will cause trouble, while the intelligent aspect freed him and his crew, well, the rest of his crew that is, out of the misery and danger. The following hubris brought them right back into it, in form of the fury or wrath of Poseidon, which I guess I do not have to tell you is a pretty bad thing when you are on sea, angering the god of the sea. And it is in this act that ultimately condemns him to his long wandering. So, the chain of cause and effect in Homer is perfectly clear. Nolan, however, has written himself into a narrative dead end. His insistence on demythologizing the story means he wants the gods to exist only within the minds of the characters. And that I can absolutely not agree with. Anyway, for that reason, Polypemos cannot speak. And mythological elements like that are precisely what Nolan wishes to avoid in his rationalized interpretation. But once Odysseus and Polypemos can no longer communicate, the iconic exchange and Odysseus' famous taunt can no longer happen either. So, the screenplay, therefore, faces a problem. Because it still needs a reason why the crew later believes Poseidon is pursuing them. And honestly, Nolan solves this dilemma, yet he solves it in an extremely clumsy fashion. You see, as Polypemos roars in agony while being blinded, the crew later convinces themselves that they heard him cry out the name Poseidon. The same one who did not speak, all of a sudden, is crying out to the god of the sea. From this, they immediately conclude that the Cyclops must be Poseidon's son. And to be honest, that's quite a bit of a far stretch and feels painfully artificial. But don't worry, it gets even worse. As the men flee the cave, Odysseus throws a spear at Polypemos, a supposed substitute for the original taunt. I mean, it's totally the same, isn't it? His companions immediately accuse him of provoking Poseidon, whysoever. But that simply doesn't work. Odysseus throws the spear after the Cyclops has supposedly called upon Poseidon. So, why would Odysseus then throw a spear? That means the curse now stems from the blinding itself, and not from the spear throw. The causal chain that is supposed to launch the entire voyage is therefore internally inconsistent. Even more importantly, the concept of hubris is fundamentally altered. Again, Nolan missing the point entirely. The very thing that sets all of the voyage going in the first place. In Homer, we see an intelligent man whose pride gets the better of him. In Nolan's version, though, this becomes little more than a tactical, foolish spear throw at an already defeated giant. And that is then where the curse would come from, the spear throw after the defeating. Odysseus no longer appears vain. He simply appears incompetent. And that is not the only time in this movie either. It is an astonishingly stupid decision one that nearly goes wrong and has no real benefit in the first place. Again, Polyphemus is already defeated at this point. Instead of looking like history's greatest strategist, he comes across as someone who isn't particularly bright. Then again, what else should we expect from the man who designed that Trojan horse? And this problem runs through the entire film. I'm honestly not sure whether Nolan intentionally portrays Odysseus as intellectually mediocre, or challenged even, or whether this is simply an unintended consequence of the screenplay. The dialogue constantly insists that Odysseus is Agamemnon's greatest strategist. But what we actually see on screen is someone who often appears to be, quite frankly, the weakest mind in the room, or on the ship, or in the cave. The sirens provide yet another example. In Nolan's version, there's virtually no reason why Odysseus wants to hear the song. By contrast, the 1954 adaptation, the movie establishes his motivation almost instantly. His curiosity, his pride, and his relentless desire to experience the unknown are all clearly embedded within his character. The version of Odysseus simply does not fit in Nolan's film. As a result, the siren sequence, which is already rather unimaginative, also fails completely unmotivated. The Cyclops episode also lacks something essential: moments of stillness. There is one genuinely effective moment when a giant seals the cave with an enormous boulder and disappears into the darkness. That just works. But from that point onward, everything happens far too quickly. Again, the despair, the fear, the grief over the companions who have been devoured. Nolan simply refuses to spend time on these emotions. But again, don't worry. The next episode fares even worse. The Laestrygonians barely appear before they are already gone again, a theme of the entire movie. In fact, almost everything shown during the sequence had already been revealed in the trailers. One could have removed the entire episode without changing much at all. Kirke receives similarly short treatment. She and Odysseus share a single brief conversation inside a small room. Nothing remains of the magical enchantress who, in Homer's epic, keeps the hero with her for an entire year. Instead, Nolan reduces the entire episode to a 3-minute dialogue, in which Kirke is casually redefined as the embodiment of suppressed femininity, because why not? Basically, another thematic checkpoint ticked, another important modern message hurriedly inserted. And then the film moves just on. To be fair, the introduction to the sequence is generally effective. The moment when Kirke transforms the hungry, ravenous sailors into swine feels as though it has stepped directly out of one of David Cronenberg's classic body horror films. Yet again, it is hurried, it is rushed. There is barely any time to get any sort of immersion or to appreciate any sort of cinematic experience. The encounters with the sirens, Scylla and Charybdis are dispatched again, just as quickly and rushed. Within a matter of seconds, the ship rose past the whirlpool. Again, something that in the original epic was quite an issue and took longer than a few seconds. A few monstrous tentacles snatch several crew members from the deck. So, we can cross out lost crew members. I guess the monster has fulfilled its purpose, and that's it. Scylla receives perhaps 30 seconds of screen time. But here I must say, fortunately, because the creature simply looks terrible, and not in a good way. But if they would have made it properly, it could have gotten an epic design. Yet, it did look terrible. And again, not in a good way. As successful as many of the film's practical effects are, the CGI Scylla looks like something from a low-budget mockbuster. You can find more convincing monsters in almost any production from The Asylum. Someone will have to explain to me why this scene is supposed to be impressive. And again, a little hint at the introduction where I mentioned the false positive ratings. As for the sirens, Nolan seems generally unsure on what to do with them. So, once again, as mentioned previously, the episode is just rushed through as quickly and as superficially as possible. Compared to the other film adaptation, the difference is rather striking. Now, a little bit ironic, the entire middle section of Nolan's Odyssey somehow manages to feel both rushed and painfully dull at the same time. Yet the reason for this is rather simple. The story is never told in a way that truly draws us in. And even if it would be, we would be thrown out of it anyway because of the rapid TikTok-like editing. So, most importantly, we completely lose any sense of just how much time this tune is supposed to encompass. Again, have a look at my summary. That is especially disappointing because handling the passage of time is normally one of Nolan's greatest strengths. Just an example, Interstellar. He created such an overwhelming atmosphere that we could almost feel the effects of time dilation ourselves. That is immersion. The pain of a father watching his daughter's entire life slip away from him was emotionally tangible. Here, Nolan had the opportunity to create something similarly powerful between Odysseus and his son Telemachus. Instead, that opportunity is completely wasted. Now, ironically, in many ways, Interstellar is actually the better adaptation of the Odyssey. It has even the names different than the Odyssey. Because the voyage races from one episode to the next, the emotional relationships between the characters never have a chance to develop. The friendship between Odysseus and Eurylochus is never properly established. For those that don't know, Eurylochus was the second in command and brother-in-law during the return home, Nostos. He famously survives the enchantress Kirke's magic, but later dooms the crew by convincing them to slaughter the sacred cattle of the sun god or sun titan Helios. To be honest, again, not the brightest idea. We are repeatedly told that these men have endured countless hardships together, but we never truly see it. So when Eurylochus eventually dies, the emotional impact is about as moving as reading, well, a telephone book. There is nothing there. Likewise, the gradual breakdown of the crew's loyalty never materializes. You see, in Homer's epic, the sailors begin as devoted followers who admire and trust their captain. I mean, he is a famous and well-known person. He is the king of Ithaca. Only to slowly descend into doubt. After all, it takes quite a bit of time until they get back. Well, one of them get back. Resentment, and then finally outright disobedience. The entire emotional arc is once again almost completely absent. We are not done yet. There is the visit to the Hades, the underworld, which is disappointing. The mystical atmosphere of the original is replaced with emotional coldness. Here, Odysseus encounters Sinon. Why would he be in the Odyssey? A character who does not even appear in Homer at all, but instead is described in detail centuries later by the Roman poet Virgil in his Aeneid. And as said over and over again, Greek mythology is not the same as Roman mythology. They are different. Now, according to Virgil, Sinon deceived the Trojans into bringing the wooden halls inside the city. Mind you, the wooden halls did not look as stupid as in Nolan's movie. Nolan reverses that idea. In his version, Odysseus deceives Sinon by never telling him that Greek soldiers are hiding inside the halls. However, he could not notice that. So, in other words, Odysseus deliberately sacrifices him. And that is already a rather questionable plan, because it assumes Sinon will patiently remain beside the halls for days, within enemy territory, and still not flee once the Trojans finally approach him. But I've already explained that strategic brilliance is hardly the film's strongest quality, let alone casting choices. So, this addition serves only one purpose: to burden Odysseus with even more guilt over the Trojan War. Later, in Hades, again the underworld, Sinon confronts him with a lengthy moral lecture. Again, in the Odyssey, Sinon is not there. It is Achilles who talks to Odysseus and then tells him about his own regrets of choosing a glorious war life, which ended rather short, over a long home life. And that is actually pretty crucial. Anyway, for this, have a look at my previous video. So, rather than allowing Matt Damon's performance to communicate Odysseus' remorse through silence, again, I told this, it is quite missing those silent moments, facial expressions, and body language as Sinon dies. A scene that could have been emotionally devastating. But again, the screenplay simply hurries through it. Instead, everything is explained afterward through explicit dialogue. So, because the film rushes through Hades, several of the most important encounters from the original poem disappear entirely. Again, the absence of Achilles is one thing. But Odysseus doesn't even meet his own mother. That omission is far more significant. In Homer's Odyssey, he has no idea that she has died until this very moment. It is one of the emotional turning points of the entire story. I mean, so is the conversation with Achilles as well. It is fundamental, strengthening Odysseus' determination to return home. Yet again, Nolan, missing the entire point completely, removes it altogether. As a result, the underworld becomes little more than another sterile checkpoint on the itinerary. And that perfectly illustrates where Nolan's priorities lie. They certainly are not with the film's emotional core, or with faithful adaptation of mythology either. Now, the casting is yet another piece pulled from an already unstable construction. The casting of Lupita Nyong'o as Helen was, for obvious reason, a misstep. It does not have to be Diana Kruger, who played a, in my opinion, perfect Helen of Troy in the movie Troja, 2004. But at least it should go in that direction. Another great example of a Helen of Troy would be the Greek actress, or I should say late Greek actress, Irene Papas. That has nothing to do with her, Lupita, acting ability. A talented actress can still be fundamentally miscast. And that alone would not necessarily ruin the film. The real issue is that Nolan pushes this approach to its absolute limit. Odysseus' crew consists of blonde Europeans, black actors, Indian actors. There's even a Korean one there. It's certainly diverse. Everyone is represented, except Greeks, who, by the way, contributed to the budget of the movie. The decisive problem here is that the screenplay never once attempts to explain this composition. If the film had established that these were allied warriors from distant lands who had joined the Greek coalition against Troy. By the way, we do see something similar with the Argonautica in terms of gathering different regional heroes. So that would have been perfectly reasonable. A little bit questionable, maybe, but it would be reasonable and people could understand. Instead, here in the movie, it does the exact opposite. When a black actor and an Indian actor stand side by side and casually declare, "We are Greeks," the moment becomes somewhat unintentionally comical. Honestly, it feels absurd and a bit insulting to some degree. And yes, I know what many people will say. Well, I guess what many people will say. At the moment, countless videos are appearing online, explaining that the Odyssey is not a historical document. It's a work of mythology, a fictional story. And to be honest, when people saying this, it always really upsets me. It really triggers me, to say it politely. One that has been retold and reshaped countless times. And yes, as mentioned a few times, those stories can have errors in them, which can come from mistranslations or miscommunications. For example, Athena's role in the plot against Zeus. Athena had literally no reason to revolt against her father. Quite the opposite, actually. It does not fit her character, nor does it align with any of her characteristics or ideals. Moreover, she is the only one who does not get punished for revolting, while everyone else did. She is not mentioned before or after this in that context either. Anyway, the argument goes as follows. You can simply do whatever you want with it, because it is not historical. Well, that is absolute nonsense, and nothing else but that. Again, while it is true that those stories are not real, they are not events that actually happened. But those stories have meaning, symbolism, and so much more. They were used to teach, educate, to explain the surroundings, to warn, to show so much different things, and to explain so many things. And thus, every appearance, every name, every usage of a certain word over another, again, dad instead of father, had meaning. You can even find meaning in the very names of the characters and their lineages. So, the argument, it is just mythology, completely misses the point and shows that people have no idea what mythology actually is. They most likely compare it to Marvel or DC comics, like a comic book story, which becomes even more evident when we are talking about the different versions of stories. As said before, even the lineages have meaning. And thus, there can be different origins depending on what is needed. For example, Aphrodite, the wonderful goddess of love, and so much more. Either being much older than Zeus, that would be the Theogony from Hesiod, born out of the fight between Kronos and Uranus, when, well, something gets cut off. And thus being the oldest member of the Olympians, symbolizing that love is beyond power, stronger, is fundamental. Or, as it is the case in Homer's epic, she is born as the daughter of Zeus, making her much younger and less powerful than Zeus. Next thing that so many people seem to miss, the Odyssey, obviously, is a fictional story. It is a mythological story. Yet, it is still firmly rooted within a specific historical world. Another topic I will certainly, at least I think I will, make a video about. It belongs to a recognizable culture, place, and period of time. If you intend to adapt that story with any degree of authenticity, there are certain boundaries that naturally come with the setting. Now, consider The Great Wall. That film is clearly fantasy as well. I mean, it features gigantic monsters, so no one would mistake it for a historical documentary. Yet, imagine if Matt Damon's character had suddenly encountered a group of unmistakably Spanish-looking men in their traditional Spanish clothing, who casually introduced themselves by saying, "We are Chinese." I doubt many people would have found that convincing. Yet, of course, Nolan is free to make basically whatever film he wants, as long as it does not against any law. He could even make an Odyssey, in which Odysseus pulled out an iPhone, searches for a signal on the Cyclops Island. To be honest, I'd definitely watched it, because that sounds like a funny parody. But if he chooses to do that, he also has to accept that not everyone will think it's a good idea. And let's be clear here. Casting decisions like these repeatedly pull the audience out of the story. For example, the Korean actor, who even slips into the kind of exaggerated acting style more commonly associated with Korean dramas or K-dramas, who is completely out of place in an adaptation of the Odyssey. Again, as a parody, I would probably enjoy it. Take it ad absurdum, but make it clear that it is a parody. Now, as said a few times, he just needed to change the names. In my opinion, he simply doesn't belong in this particular production, a non-parody. The Korean actor that is. Another issue is Hollywood's almost compulsive desire to pick recognizable stars into even the smallest supporting roles. So, Tom Holland is kinda unconvincing in this role, if not completely misplaced, because, at least for me, all I can see there is Spider-Man. His body language feels unmistakably 21st century, as if Spider-Man had, because of whatever reason, traveled back in time into, well, the time of ancient Greece. Robert Pattinson. Here I only see Cedric. I did not watch Twilight. And Anne Hathaway. Her face is just too well known. So much so that I can't really see her as Penelope. I'm not saying that her acting skills are bad. I just say her face is too recognizable. But those were not that bad actors, which is a bit ironic because one is literally playing a complete worm. Yet it becomes difficult to stay immersed when every few minutes another famous face walks across the screen. So again, the TikTok-like cutting pushes every possibility of immersion out of the window. So instead of seeing Odysseus' world, we are reminded of characters like Spider-Man, Batman, Cedric, etc. I think a few unfamiliar actors, newcomers, would have served the film so much better. Now, if there is one performance I'd single out, it would be Samantha Morton, who played Kirke. She played it well. But I do have some issues with it. Do not get me wrong, she does look beautiful. Yet Kirke should be otherworldly beautiful, something you just cannot simply realistically depict on screen. It is one of the roles that is nigh impossible to depict on screen. She is an outstanding actress, as she has proven many times before. And even here, she delivers a strong performance, so the acting is not the issue. Yet, I do not think the role itself suits her particularly well. Matt Damon does what he can, as he usually does. I just do not see him as Odysseus at all. He just does not really have the face for it. It sounds a bit harsh, I know. Certain roles just must be portrayed with a certain look. On top of that, the screenplay and the direction simply don't give him much of a hook with to begin with. I guess under those circumstances, he did pretty well. But there's just nothing more he could have done. It was destined to fail from the very beginning. And it is not his fault. Instead of portraying the proud, intelligent strategist Homer describes, Nolan transforms Odysseus into a slow, lumbering figure who never once projects convincing authority. Now, on this part, it'll be a little bit more in-depth, a little bit more technical. So, the statue of Athena in Troy is called the Palladion or Palladium. The statue was made by Athena to honor Pallas. According to Greek myth, the Palladium, or again Palladium, was a wooden statue that Athena crafted specifically to honor and remember her companion Pallas, here the daughter of Triton, after accidentally killing her during a friendly spar or practice fight. And this is one of the versions how Athena got the epithet Pallas. Another one, the one that I prefer, is the slaying of the giant Pallas during the Gigantomachy. Gigantomachy basically means war of the giants. Athena wrapped the sacred Aegis around the statue's breast and placed it beside Zeus to pay it honor in heaven, before it fell down from the sky, falling down here in quotation marks, to help found the city. You see, King Elos prayed to Zeus for a sign while building the citadel, and the wooden statue of Athena dropped directly in front of this tent. So, as mentioned already, I feel like Nolan likes playing with the guilt motive in this video, and hubris and decay of a society from a major war. Now, important, as long as this statue, the Palladion or Palladium, is staying behind the walls of Troy, the city can't be destroyed, as it is under divine protection of Athéna, here in her role as a patroness goddess, a protector deity of the city. But if that statue would be replaced outside of that city, no chance, the city will fall. Enter Odysseus and Diomedes. They steal, not destroy, and that is a very important aspect. They steal, not destroy the statue in order to break the spell of divine protection over Troy, allowing the city to finally fall. In Nolan's adaptation, however, they destroy the statue. And this is a massive issue, as we will see in this video. Original myth. The Trojan War is a tragedy of hubris, but Nolan turns it into a, well, kinda crime scene. And this is nowhere more glaring than in this exact treatment of the city sacking. In Nolan's Odyssey, during the chaotic fall of Troy, Odysseus and his men don't just conquer, they desecrate. They smash, shatter, and entirely destroy the sacred statue, the Palladium, the sacred statue of Athéna. And remember, Athéna is also the patroness goddess of Odysseus. Odysseus actively prays to Athéna, and Athéna is the one who guides, helps, and supports him throughout the entire journey, and Telemachus as well. So, on its surface, it is a visceral, cinematic moment designed to shock. And it shocked me a lot when I saw it. Nolan uses this destruction to amplify the horrors of war, cranking up the narrative stakes by tripping every frame in immediate, suffocating guilt. Yet, by shattering the stone visage of the wonderful goddess, my overall beloved goddess Athéna, Odysseus isn't just winning a war, but, and that is very crucial, he's actively breaking the cosmic laws of the very deity he prays to. It is an act of blatant disrespect, an insult to the divine, and it sets up Nolan's overarching thesis that this is not a journey about getting home, nostos, but a, once again, psychological penance for an unforgivable sin. And destroying the statue, the sacred statue of the same deity you pray to, can be seen as an unforgivable sin. So, this creative liberty completely unravels the foundational logic of the original Homeric epic. Well, when I say Homeric, I'm not entirely accurate here, because in the actual Homeric tradition, Odysseus and Diomedes don't destroy the statue, which is known, again, as the Palladium. They steal it, they sack it, they remove it from its original position, thus destroying the divine protection. But it is not in the Odyssey or Iliad that this actually happened. Once again, like with Sinon, we have another story that is being put into the Odyssey of Nolan. In the lost epic Little Iliad, or Ilias Migra, which fills the gaps of the Iliad and Odyssey. Sneaking into Troy to steal the Palladium is a calculated tactical necessity. Again, as long as that statue, the Palladium, stands inside of Troy, Troy can't fall because it is under the divine protection of Athena. So, the original Greek logic was pretty clear. Troy could not fall as long as that sacred statue remained inside its walls. So, by taking the Palladium, Odysseus was taking away the divine protection Athena granted over that city. So, to prove it, let's look at the textual evidence from the epic fragments. Mind you, that is more or less a later summary of this, because the original text has unfortunately been lost through time. First, the English version. Then the phantom of Achilles appeared to those at the wall. Afterwards, Odysseus, disguising himself as a beggar, entered the city, having been recognized by Helen, and coming to an understanding with her. He carried off the Palladium, after killing many of the Trojans. Now, the original Greek one. Well, I say original, it's the fragment. Επέτατε, ακεραίος επάσμα, το εισπέριτο τέικος παϊνέtai. Μέτατε ταούτα Οδυσσέος, με τα σχηματίστες, εις πτώκον, εις αρκέtai, εις την πόλην. Γνωρίστες τε hypoelenes, kai syntemenos autei, to Palladion, apaire, volus ton tron anelon. This is a part of the Little Iliad, Ilias Migra, and is usually attributed to Lesches, which came, most likely, decades after the Odyssey. So, most scholars date the poems approximately as follows. First, we have the Iliad, round about 750 to 700 BC. Then we have the Odyssey, about 25 years later, so 725 to 675 BC. Yet, the Iliad is possibly between 700 and 650 BC, maybe even later. Yet, very crucial here, despite the modern impression that the epic cycle was written to, well, continue Homer, that probably isn't what happened. Unlike with the Golden Apple, that is meant to give an introduction to the Iliad, a reason. I already talked about this in detail. There's a free PDF I wrote in a pinned comment. Many scholars think these poems, so the Iliad, Odyssey on the one hand and the Little Iliad on the other, emerged from the same oral tradition. Homer selected one portion of the Trojan saga, the Wrath of Achilles, and one Nostos tale. Again, that means return home, or journey home. And for this, he has the Odyssey, hence Odysseus. While poets of the cycle preserved other parts of the legendary tradition. So, the Trojan saga is the wrath of Achilles. The Nostos is the story of Odysseus. In other words, the Little Iliad was probably not conceived as a sequel to Homer, but as another epic within the broader Trojan War tradition that developed alongside the Homeric poems. Some even suggest that the Little Iliad is being attributed to Homer himself as well. But usually it is not in the Iliad or the Odyssey from Homer. So, in terms of composition, the Little Iliad was likely written within about 25 to 75 years of the Iliad, and probably around the same time, or a bit later, as the Odyssey. Again, the exact order remains uncertain because all three poems grew out of a long oral tradition before being written down. Now, if you look at this from a mythological point of view, the Little Iliad begins immediately after the death and funeral of Achilles and continues the story just until before the sack of Troy, Persis. So, the sequence is roughly as followed. We have the Iliad, which ends with Hector's funeral. Then we have the Aethiopis. Here, Achilles kills Penthesilea and Memnon then dies. Then we have the Little Iliad. Here, contest for Achilles' arms. Ajax's death. Philoctetes returns. Neoptolemus arise. And, crucial, the Palladium is stolen and the wooden horse is built. Then, of course, we have the Persis, the sack of Troy. And after all of this, we have the Odyssey. Here, Odysseus' journey home, Nostos. This begins right after Troy has fallen. So, in the story, the Little Iliad bridges the gap between the Iliad and the Odyssey, alongside the Aethiopis and Persis. The original act was a triumph of Metis, which means wisdom, and deep counsel. And if you know at least a little bit about the origin of my overall beloved goddess Athena, you know that Metis is the name of the Titan goddess of wisdom and also mother of Athena, before Zeus swallowed her. Anyway, this triumph of Metis is Odysseus' signature cunning. It was a strategic heist to claim divine favor for the Greeks, and certainly not a temper tantrum born of wartime rage, which the Odysseus of Nolan's Odyssey seems to be more in favor of. So, also something. In Homer's epics, the Iliad and Odyssey, we do have Achilles' ghost as well. Here, he only appears in the underworld, and not Xenon, by the way. In the epic cycle, though, Achilles' ghost appears over his grave at Troy to the Greek army. Then we have, of course, the famous spy mission. In Homer's epics, this is mentioned in passing conversation. And again, Xenon is not part of this. In the epic cycle, this is detailed as a major structural plot point. And for this part, very crucial, the Palladium is not mentioned in Homer's epics, Iliad and Odyssey, but in the Little Iliad, it is fully detailed as the catalyst for Troy's fall. Because, again, if that statue, the Palladium, is removed, the divine protection of Athena for the city falters, and is the only way that Troy could fall. So, by now, I hope you understand why Noah's change is such a fundamental problem, a big one. By replacing the theft with destruction, Nolan fundamentally mischaracterizes Odysseus. The mythological Odysseus survives entirely on his intellect and his deep, calculated reverence for my overall beloved goddess Athena. He would never smash her image. He knows the gods holds all the cards. Technically, the fates holding the cards, but that's just a little too deep for this conversation here. So, turning him into a sacrilegious vandal strips away his defining trait of cleverness, which Nolan did a pretty good job doing, and replaced it with prude, modern, almost nihilistic kind of behavior. Yet, more importantly, well, let's say equally importantly, it breaks the thematic spine of the story. The original Odyssey is fundamentally about Nostos, Xenia, and the reverence of the wonderful deities. And obviously, that does include following the divine laws, respecting the wonderful deities. And again, Xenia is the sacred law of hospitality, also known as Zeus's law. The trials Odysseus faces on the sea are obstacles which he caused himself due to his rather idiotic behavior towards Polyphemus. So, and those serve as tests of endurance. And again, because he blinded Polyphemus, told Polyphemus who he is, and directly offended Poseidon with that. Already said it, very stupid, but for the Homeric epic, a very crucial lesson. Already talked about this as well. So, Nolan, however, forces the narrative into a journey of guilt, which again, I already talked about as well. And here, with this, it becomes even more evident. Because Odysseus commits an explicit act of divine desecration at Troy. His entire subsequent voyage becomes a literal purgatory, which kinda makes it weird that Athena herself, or his imagine of her, appears to him after he insulted and disrespected her. So, the narrative focus shifts from a hero fighting to return to his family to a broken man being tortured by a vengeful universe for his war crimes. By trying to make the story more grounded, gritty, and drastic, Nolan sacrifices the profound cultural depth of the myth on the altar of modern trauma tropes, a psychological journey. He gives us an Odysseus who isn't clever at all, just complicit. The battle scenes are another major immersion breaker, as if there would have been any immersion at any point anyway. And I don't think there's any point pretending otherwise. They are an absolute disaster. Normally, I consider fight choreography somewhat secondary to storytelling. It still shouldn't be completely a parody of fight, but storytelling is still the primary part. That what weighs in much more. You see, a film can survive mediocre action if the narrative is strong. But what Nolan presents here is unlike anything I can remember seeing in a blockbuster, especially a blockbuster of this scale. To be fair, it has been a while since I saw another new movie, aside from the current Nolan one. At no point do we see disciplined military formations. We never get the sense that these are trained soldiers who have fought together for years. Combat consists almost entirely of people running around screaming while the main characters slowly trudge through the battlefield. apparently to show some sort of importance, to emphasize the weight of their main character. As the city gates open, a mass of shouting creeks rushes inside. Right in the middle of them lumbers Agamemnon, in what kinda looks like a Batman armor, with all the black. Don't get me wrong, it does look brilliant. It's just kinda misplaced here. So, slowly moving as though he'd just finished a little bit of a drinking party. Yet, don't worry, the individual fight choreography isn't much better either. And during the battle against the Laestrygonians, one enemy repeats the exact same horizontal strike 3, if not 4 times in succession. Every single time, Odysseus talks in precisely the same way. It's as if both characters are trapped in a broken animation loop. Yet thankfully we have our trusty fancy shaky camera, who rushes in to hide the problem. Well, it tries its best. Now, the film reaches its peak absurdity during the supposedly epic final battle on Ithaca. To be fair, portraying one man successfully fighting against an overwhelming number has always been a bit difficult. Precisely for that reason, the choreography has to be especially convincing. Again, the 1954 film, starring Kirk Douglas, understood this. Douglas portrayed an Odysseus who was immensely strong, but also energetic, agile, and constantly in motion. He practically kind of buzzed around the battlefield. For its time, in the 1950s, the fight felt surprisingly believable. Even now, it does not look that bad. Nolan's Odyssey, by contrast, which is 70 years younger, spends most of the film looking emotionally exhausted and physically sluggish. So, when the climatic battle arrives, he moves with all the grace of a statue, wearing roller skates and being pushed from A to B. And the result is the kind of cheap martial art film style. Odysseus defeats 2 or 3 opponents, while the other 15 standing over there politely waiting for their turn in the turn-based fighting scene. But then he is knocked to the ground, 5 or 6 enemies surrounding him and begin kicking him. That's surely game over, isn't it? No, the camera suddenly becomes obscured, shakes violently for just a moment. And when the view clears, Odysseus is magically back on his feet. Conveniently, he is now holding an axe. How lucky that the shaky camera always arrives just in time when the screenplay needs an escape route. From there, things become almost slapstick. Odysseus simply begins spinning in circles with the newly adapted axe, wildly swinging in every direction. The scene isn't exciting. It's unintentionally funny, but in a bad way. The highest achievement of action choreography is making the unbelievable feel believable. And that is one of the things that create immersion. Unfortunately, Nolan never accomplished that. I mean, how would he with those rapid cuts every 5 seconds? Had this been a light-hearted adventure film, perhaps these shortcomings would have been easier to forgive. Yet, Nolan clearly intends this to be a profound, psychologically complex meditation on trauma, guilt, and the human condition. Which again is completely missing the point of the original Homeric Odyssey. When a film aims for that level of seriousness, its craftsmanship has to support its ambition. Here, it straight out fails. Under those circumstances, fight scenes like these become a complete disaster. We are almost there, just a few more points. The next is the production design. The film has often been described as a monumental epic on an unprecedented scale. It would be lovely if that would be true, honestly. I'm wondering what movies the critics were watching when writing this. For a blockbuster of this size, the Odyssey actually feels surprisingly small. Most of the sets consist of relatively confined spaces. Let's take Ithaca, for example. We spend what feels like 90 to 80% of the time inside the same great hall. It's a nice looking hall, though. Even the supposedly magnificent city of Troy seems to consist of little more than a staircase, an inner courtyard with a handful of olive trees. I give it that, it's important that it has to be olive trees, and a papier-mâché tower that dramatically collapses in flames, more than once. By comparison, Wolfgang Petersen's Troy, 2004, conveyed a far greater sense of scale through its cinematography alone. Now, spectacle by itself does not make a film good. Yet, the claim that Nolan has created some unprecedented cinematic monument is simply not true. It doesn't hold up. The film constantly tries to appear grand. Yet, after productions like The Lord of the Rings, its sense of epic scale is hardly remarkable. To Nolan's credit, though, he did rely heavily on practical sets and physical construction rather than drowning everything in anonymous CGI. Again, for example, the Cyclops hand, an enormous Cyclops hand, which looks generally impressive, but is just not enough. And certainly the TikTok-like editing style doesn't help there either. Yet, even worse, unfortunately, the costumes, they are far less successful. Agamemnon's armor, as cool as it looks, feels so completely out of place. I mean, it does look epic, but it is not the right time and place for such a brilliant looking armor like that. And despite the importance the film assigns to Agamemnon, again, with such a brilliant looking armor, remarkably little is actually done with his character. And then there are the Trojan soldiers. Well, about that. These are the Trojans. This is generally how they appear in the film. Obviously. The armor looks less like Bronze Age equipment and more like something children might assemble out of a cardboard for a school project. Clearly, the intention is to contrast Agamemnon's dark visual design with the Trojan bright colors, to create a symbolic opposition between civilization and its enemies. And in theory, that's a brilliant idea. But symbolism does not require costumes that look cheap or completely out of place. Once again, the film demonstrates an important lesson. It doesn't matter how many elaborate sets you build. Nolan could have spent billions of dollars reconstructing Troy stone by stone, which would actually be something really cool if anyone would do this. If the story isn't told effectively, for the movie then, it doesn't matter. But again, it would be really cool if someone actually would do that. Reconstructing Troy stone by stone. And something that bothers me a lot, as someone who has a little bit of autism, small inconsistencies. Let's just take Argos, Odysseus' faithful dog. Early in the film, we see him as an adorable puppy. Later, when he is fully grown, he is suddenly a completely different breed of dog. Surely, I'm not a dog expert, despite really liking dogs, yet I'm a cat kind of person. But I'm pretty sure those two dogs are not the same breed. Correct me if I'm wrong though. And details like that should certainly not happen in a production of this scale. I mean, is it really that hard to keep the dog breed consistent? And in keeping with the rest of the film, Argo's emotional reunion with Odysseus is again rushed through so quickly that one of the most touching moments of Homer's epic is barely noticeable. It barely registers. So, is it still telling the Odyssey? Or is it merely borrowing Homer's characters and names in order to tell an entirely different story? Well, I leave that question with you. I think I made my point pretty clear. Well, that's it. A more lengthy review than I expected, and now I'm really exhausted.